Hello everyone, I am your bard for the night, your curator of tales, your storyteller, your keeper of secrets. I am Archibald, and welcome to another fabulously creepy stories. Our fourth episode, not counting the pilot. Now, I would like to begin tonight's tale with a little excerpt that will share to us on our Discord channel. Now remember, if you have something you would like to share and heard on this show, be sure to join us on Discord and leave us a little line in our creepy channel. Now this one comes from Cranky Pants. A few hours after I was buried alive, I was thrilled when I heard someone digging me out. My joy quickly faded when I realized the sound was coming from under me. Oh, wasn't that a lovely appetizer to tonight's thrill? Now, I do have a few short stories I would like to share with you tonight, and a few longer ones as well. Tonight, I would like to start off with a short story called Seeing Red, the First Day of School by Zenreo. Everyone loves the first day of school, right? New year, new classes, new friends. It's a day full of potential and hope before all the dreary depressions of reality show up and ruin all the fun. I like the first day of school for a different reason though. You see, I have a sort of power. When I look at people, I can sense a sort of aura around them. A colored outline based on how long that person has to live. Most everyone I meet around my age is surrounded by a solid green hue, which means they have plenty of time left. A fair amount of them have yellow-oranges tinged to their auras, which tends to mean a car crash or some other tragedy. Anything that takes people before their time, as they say. The real fun is when the auras venture into the red end of the spectrum, though. Every now and again I'll see someone who's basically a walking spotlight. Those are the ones who get murdered or kill themselves. It's such a rush to see them and know that their time is numbered. With that in mind, I always get to class very early so I can scout out my classmates' fate. The first kid who walked in was basically radiating red. I chuckled to myself. Too damn bad, bro. But, as people kept walking in, they all had the same intense glow. I finally caught a glimpse of the rose-tinted reflection in the window, but I was too stunned to move. Our professor walked in and locked the door, his aura a sickening shade of green. Oh my goodness. I think I'll give that a glowing review of a story, wouldn't you? Now, we've had 2 appetizers so far, but I'm sure you're waiting for the main course in our stories. Coming from Creepypasta, yet again, such a good site for stories, but terrible for optimization. What are with those ads? Our first story is called The Fairies, written by Anonymous. I doubt it's the hacking group. Probably someone who's just too shy to put their name on their title. Ah, Amber Jur, welcome to the stream. You just got back from work? Well, I hope you had a wonderful first day of work. Must have been so fabulous for you. Now, on to the scary tale. This is The Fairies. I've always been fascinated with the unknown, particularly creatures of the unknown. I don't know when this obsession of mine started. It probably started when I was a young child and I would just watch a documentary series of aliens, Bigfoot, Yeti, unknown sea monsters and the like. My obsession earned me a share of names and bullying in school. Like a good nerd, I pushed up my glasses and shook it off and moved on to college where I earned a degree in zoology and eventually my master's and PhD. Along the way I had discovered the gym, alcohol, women, contacts, and other things life had to offer. However, my main love was cryptozoology. I spent 2 years of my late 20s running around the world with well-known and respected biologists, zoologists, marine biologists, looking for new species and studying others that we knew little about. My colleagues and myself found new insects, fish, reptiles, but never anything that would fall under the strange or mythical. I made a name for myself in the science community. People like to say I could find anything but Bigfoot. I enjoyed my small notoriety, my small little bit of fame. After those exciting 2 years, I decided I wanted to work somewhere more traditional. While creating footprints around the world was fun, I was tired of never being in one place for more than a few weeks at a time. I also wanted to spend more time trying to research and find those storied monsters than worked on someone else's expedition. I landed a job at a big state university in Ohio, teaching in the biology department. I also started a cryptozoology club, which attracted a large following of students. With permission from the university, I would take students to so-called haunted places, hotspots for unknown creatures and the like. We would always come up with some crazy disembodied EVP, blurry video, or grainy photo. We never had anything conclusive, but it was fun for the students and myself, and it got them to think outside the box and question what we really know about our world. The passion for trying to discover the unknown that I saw in the group members is what kept my interest in it so strong. A few months after we started I'm sorry, skipped a paragraph. Like I said before, my main love was cryptozoology until one faculty Christmas party. There I met Diane. She was this beautiful brown-haired woman about my age who worked in the English department teaching creative writing. I knew I needed to meet this woman. I wasn't a scrawny nerd from high school anymore. I was in shape, successful in my field, and not too bad looking. At least I told myself that. I used a corny pickup line to introduce myself. She had a cornier comeback. We laughed, talked the entire party, exchanged numbers, and the rest is history. A few months after we started dating, we moved in together. I had never fallen so hard for someone. We shared a lot of common interests, but had a lot of differences. I liked the outdoors, and she preferred to stay in. I was a busybody, and she was more relaxed. We both liked wine and a good book. She was a published writer who wrote these amazing stories about make-believe creatures. I read several of her short stories, and one of her books which all seemed to be centered on forest, fairies, and children. Diane, I said, closing her latest published book as I sprawled out on the couch one evening. Have I told you that you are an excellent writer? Diane was in the kitchen making her famous chicken Alfredo. Yes, but you can tell me again if you like, she playfully responded. Can I ask you a question? Where do you get your inspiration for these stories? She walked out of the kitchen, wiping her hands with a dishcloth. I get my stories from my grandmother. She would tell me when she visited from Canada when I was young. I sat up on the couch and gracefully took a seat next to her. Tell me more, please, I said inquisitively. When I was young, Diane began, with a look of remembrance on her face, we would visit my grandmother every summer in Alberta. She lived in a town called New Village. There weren't many people there. It was a beautiful town, shadowed by snow-capped peaks. There was a great big pine forest that lay between the town and the closest mountain. It was probably a few hundred acres or so. At the base of the mountain was this crystal clear lake that was full of fish and that emptied into a small river. All the kids in town would play in the forest, lake, and river, but was strictly forbidden from staying out past sundown. This was enforced harshly by the town people, including my grandmother. Diane paused for a moment. Go on, I urged with a smile. So, my grandmother would tell me about the fairies in the forest and how they looked how they like to play tricks on people. If I disobeyed my elders, they would take me away forever. Those stories always freaked me out. My parents didn't like her telling me these stories, but they agreed that I should listen to my grandmother and be inside before dark. The stories didn't bother me too much until one of the young boys I played with each summer went missing in the woods. He ran away one night into the forest after a fight with his father. They never found him, and the townspeople didn't bother looking for him until after sunrise. I just can't believe the people wouldn't go looking for the boy in the forest until the sun came up, unless they truly believed in fairies. The fairies in my book are mischievous, but much nicer than the ones in my grandmother's stories. They never take people away. Diane's face was now a half smile. Kind of your thing, isn't it? What do you mean? I looked at her slightly confused. You know, imaginary creatures that live in the woods. She smiled at me with a smart-ass grin. Well, I've heard and read up on fairy folklore, but it's not something of many cryptozoologists spend a vast amount of time on. However, I've never heard of a town afraid of fairies, especially from the first-hand account. It would be interesting to investigate something like that. Diane smiled a mischievous smile that stretched from ear to ear. Good. My parents want me and you want to meet you, and I want you to meet them. My grandmother passed away when I was young, and my parents inherited the house. They retired there a few years ago. You can come with me this summer when I visit them and solve the town's fairy problem. By this point, she was standing over me, giving me the puppy dog eyes. So I agreed. Just like that, our summer plans were made in the early June. I found myself on a plane from Ohio to Alberta with Diane and a full bag, and some of my recording equipment I took on my excursions with the student group. Once there, we picked up a rental car and drove what felt like hours into the forest-covered mountains. At one point, we left the winding highway to exit onto an even more treacherous two-lane mountain road. 15 minutes from the highway, we arrived from what looked like a ghost town. There were several small shops there that were closed and what looked like an unfinished hotel from the 60s. This place has become a ghost town since I was a girl, Diane said as we drove past the abandoned buildings. A few short minutes later, we pulled up to her parents' driveway. Her parents' house sat on a short dead-end road of a few dozen houses. Behind her house laid a thick pine forest she had mentioned to me. In the distant background loomed a majestic snow-capped mountaintop. Her parents greeted us with smiles at the door. Diane excitedly hugged her mother and father. I, trying to hide my nerves meeting my girlfriend's parents for the first time, quickly shook their hands and introduced myself as John, the guy that was here to fix their fairy problem. They both smiled and paused before saying through their teeth, "The fair problem is under control. Come in, dinner is about ready." My nervous attempt to be funny appeared to have become a strikeout. Dinner went well, and we talked about our trip up here and what I did at the university. With our bellies full, Diane's father invited me out to the back porch for a beer. "So, you teach cryptozoology at the university?" Diane's father asked before taking a big swig of beer from his bottle. "No. I teach animal behavior and social interaction. I would like to teach cryptozoology at some point, but I need to have a class curriculum written and approved before I can." I slouched in my porch chair and began to enjoy my beer. "I suppose Diane has told you a bunch of crazy stories about the fairies in our woods." I looked at him and gave a small nod as I took another sip of the bottle. "They're all true. Sounds stupid crazy, but they're all true. My wife told me those stories too, and I wouldn't have believed them if I hadn't seen some crazy stuff, or experienced our neighbor's niece disappear one night 2 summers ago in the pine forest." He pointed towards the wood line, just off the backyard, while taking another swig from his beer. "We've had a drought the last few years, and the pines are all dried up and getting brown. The forest used to be dark green. Now it's just a sad brownish color." Diane's father finished the beer and looked up at the sky. The pines were brown and looked all dried out. Even in the setting sun, the air wasn't filled with the typical pine wood smell. In fact, the air was cool and stale. Ah, welcome to the stream, little DJ girl. I hope you're having a frightful time so far. And thank you for the host, Amberger. It's very much appreciated. You want to see a magic trick? He asked me excitedly. Sure. I said, half expecting him to pull a coin out from behind my ear. Watch the back gate. The sun sets about 9 p.m. today. About the time the latch will pop up and it'll swing open. No hands, he said, waving his in the air. Dan's parents' yard was fenced up with a single back gate, which led directly into the forest. Some of the forest pine branches hung over the gate. I wasn't sure how to take Diane's father's statement, so I waited. The sun slowly crept behind the mountain, and the clock reached 9 p.m. I finished my beer as we quietly sat on the back porch. As I was about to get up and tell Diane's father that this was the longest trick I've ever waited for, the sound of scraping against the opposite side of the fence caught my ear. It started at the back corner of the fence. It sounded like a child was dragging a stick across the pickets as they walked by. The sound accelerated towards the gate. I was laser focused on the gate, paying no attention to Diane or her mother, who had walked out onto the deck with us. Ching! Went the gate latch, and the gate swung open slowly, as if pushed softly by an invisible force. No way, I muttered to myself as I slowly began to walk off the deck towards the back gate. A strong, forceful grip pulled me back onto the deck. My head snapped around to see Diane's father gripping my arm with force. Don't go over there, he said with a stern voice and look. Robert, let me go. Diane's mother chimed in. John, stay here. Do not go anywhere near the woods or the wood line after the sun has set. Mom, Dad, stop! Diane strongly pulled me away from her parents. You're embarrassing me. She turned to me and said, I'll take you into the woods tomorrow. It's fine. You'll see. Come inside. She turned and graciously stormed back into the house. Feeling awkward, I pretended to take out one last drink of beer and began to follow Diane. You can go into the woods all you want during the day, but as soon as the sun sets, you must be out, Robert said, cutting me off before I could walk inside. I stopped and looked at him. His face showed genuine concern. I glanced back at Diane's mother. Her face had the same expression. Diane really likes you, John, her mother stated. We would prefer if you left with her when you visit here is done. Explore all you want, but please, listen to us about the woods. Yes, please listen to Mary and me, Robert said pleadingly. I looked down. I understand. I'll make sure to heed your warning. I brought some research equipment with me. Is it okay if I place a camera on the fence to capture this tomorrow? That'll be fine, Robert said. Just do it early when it's still light. I agreed, and with that, I went inside feeling a bit confused at Diane's parents' insistence on staying away from the woods after dark. Diane and I got ready for bed that night, and I lay down on the bed with her head on my chest. I tried to piece together if her family really believed in fairies, and if their facial concern earlier was genuine. Your family really believes in fairies, don't they? I asked Diane. She rolled over and picked up her head to my face. It's embarrassing. Not the fact that they believe in that stuff, but that they are so adamant that the woods are a bad place. If I had been rebellious as a kid, I would have run off into the woods many times. They were beginning to act like my grandmother when I was a child. I don't know if my dad does that gate trick, but it's getting old. He pulled it on me 2 years ago and insists it's not him. Diane was getting more annoyed the more she talked. I'll take you into the woods tomorrow. You'll see. I used to play there as a child. There is nothing wrong with it. I pulled her in tight to my body and kissed her a good night's kiss softly. Okay, we'll go have an adventure tomorrow, I said before dozing off. The next morning, Diane took me into the pine forest after breakfast. She showed me all the things she could remember from her childhood. She showed me her favorite trails, which had become slightly overgrown. She showed me her favorite spot on the river and her favorite shore on the lake. The lake shore was littered with dead fish here and there, but strangely, no rotten fish smell. It's a shame they all died. I remember the lake being healthy when I was young. We used to fish here as kids, she explained to me as we navigated the shores. And the lake shore was an old foundation to a building that never started. Diane said that it was supposed to be allowed for visitors to the lake in the 60s, but it was never finished. The crumbling foundation was covered in moss and looked more like a pathetic version of Stonehenge more than anything else. It was about noon, and we agreed to head back through the woods to get some lunch at our parents' house. As we walked hand in hand through the woods on trails that I was surprised she could still navigate from her childhood memories, I noticed that almost all the pines were brown or brownish green. Their trunks were rather large, swollen even, as if stuffed with something. The more of the underbrush was dead or looked like it was dying. Diane mentioned that there had been a little rain during the summer and spring for the last few years. I thought it strange that the forest would be dried out, but the river and lake didn't seem to be at low levels. At lunch, Robert brought a topic of cryptozoology and my interest in what they felt were fairies in the forest. You should talk to Daniel Whitefeather. He's a detective with the county and lives a few houses down. He's also the last of the tribe that once lived here. He's sort of an amateur historian for the area and has plenty of stories to tell about the fairies in the woods. I'll give him a call and tell him you're coming over. Robert gave me the address, and at encouragement of Diane, I ventured to his house that afternoon, as Diane and her mother had planned to do some shopping in the town next over. I knocked on Daniel's door, unsure if he would be home or not. The lock unlatched and the door slowly opened, and an older man with a weathered, beaten face opened it. Are you Danielle? I'm sorry, are you Daniel? I asked, reaching out my hand for a handshake. My name is John, and you want to know about the woods, correct? He said, cutting me off. Robert called and told me about you. Come in, please. I've got a few hours before I need to head to work to cover the night shift. I entered the house. It was large and filled with mounted animals, fish, and a variety of what appeared to be Native American memorabilia. He led me into his living room and motioned for me to sit. His living room wall on all sides was filled with cabinets and bookshelves. There was no TV, and a thick layer of dust caked most flat surfaces. So, what can I tell you? Daniel stated slowly, taking a seat in his chair across from me. Well, whatever you know about the forest, or the supposed creatures in the forest, I started. I study unknown creatures, mythological creatures, or whatever you want to call them, and I'm familiar with fairies and folklore, but I've never encountered an entire town that seemed to fear these creatures like they supposedly do here. Daniel sat back for a moment and looked up at the ceiling, as if to pull his thoughts through the tiles. My tribe, or rather my ancestors, was the first to settle this area. As an oral tradition goes, we were once a large and proud tribe that numbered greatly in Alberta long before the white settlers came. A harsh run of winters and warring with other tribes cut our numbers down, and our enemies pushed us into the original land. We wandered until we found this place. Cold, starved, and desperate for shelter, we felt blessed to have come across a place with good hunting. The mountains sheltered us, and the river and the lake supplied us with fresh water. I looked at him eagerly and took a small break to remember his words. He sat up and leaned forward in his chair. The story goes that when we found this land, we were forbidden to enter the forest by some strange creatures that lived there. My people will call them the Forest Walkers. They said they were guardians of the pine forest here. The chief, seeing his people starving and without a place to live struck a deal with the forest walkers. We could hunt, fish, live here, and they would protect us as long as once every moon cycle we agreed to give them one of our own. Wait, I interrupted. So, like a sacrifice? Yes, Daniel continued. Each full moon, we would send one chosen person by lot into the forest. Their screams would fill the night sky. It was a horrible thing, but for us to survive, the chief made a deal and we kept to it. Many years would pass as we sacrificed one after another of our town. Our numbers were slowly decreased over time, but those who remained were always safe, had food to hunt, and fresh water to drink. Daniel got up from his seat and walked over to the bookshelf and pulled out a leather-bound book, whose pages' edges were yellowed from age. He plopped the book down in front of me, on a coffee-stained table between us. The book landed with a thud, and the dust cloud filled the air. Sorry, I've been busy and haven't had much time to clean, Daniel stated, fighting back a cough and swatting the air to clear it. It's no problem, I calmly replied, as I sat back trying to avoid the allergen-heavy mushroom cloud. But how does what appears to be an Indian legend turn into a town of people fearing the woods? That book, he stated, pointing at it, contains all the stories about the forest walkers that had been passed down from generation to generation in my tribe. I started writing them down when I was young. I got them from the elders, my relatives, and many others before they all passed. I'm the last one, and I figured someone should document this so others can know what we witnessed. Daniel sat back in his chair again. Now the dust has settled. Everything changed when the white man came into our land. First, there was one man. He was an explorer. We did not see him as a threat, so we let him pass. However, he found gold in the river. He told others. Many others showed up looking for the gold in the river. They brought furs, meats, beads, and guns. They were willing to trade for small pieces of the land so they could live here while they prospect. We agreed. The prospectors were supplying us with new things, and we were trading small parcels of land for them. The white people cut down trees to make a clearing in which our town sits now. They built houses. They hunted and fished. We no longer sent one of our own to the forest every full moon. So the sacrifices stopped because you were getting what you needed from the settlers, I questioned. What about your deal with the creatures? We lived peacefully alongside the white man, Daniel stated again. The forest walkers were angry that we had broken our deal. They would watch us from the tree line in the shadows. Their anger could be felt. One night, several prospectors who were fishing in the lake came home through the forest late at night. The walkers took one of them violently in front of the others. Their screams filled the night air. The survivors fled and never returned. They left their belongings and even their gold because they were so scared. Soon, people were in the woods past dark began to disappear. No trace could be found. Daniel sat up and took a deep breath. When people started to avoid the woods after dark, they started to trick people into coming into the woods. They would mimic the cries of children or loved ones during the night. Anyone who ran into the woods to save them would be taken. They took 3 mothers of our tribe once because the walkers cried like babies in the forest line. The women ran to save the babies, only to be taken away. They only took one person at a time, but they started taking them more often as revenge. So, they can mimic sounds or voices? I questioned, a bit confused. Yes. He began rubbing the sides of his head. They can take anyone's voice, or sound like anything that would entice you to enter the woods. The greed of gold was greater than the danger of being taken, and more white people showed up until so many had disappeared that the word got out that this land was cursed. Many people left, but those who were widows with small children stayed. Everyone who lives here now is a relative of someone taken. My tribe helped them and welcomed them to stay here. It became forbidden to enter the forest at night. So, why are there people still living here? I questioned. Why not pack up and leave this place if it's cursed? My people made a pact with those who left from prospecting rush. We agreed to guard this place and keep people from the evil here. We would tell no one about this place. We had made a deal and broken it. We had put others in danger. However, no matter what we did or said, the word always made it out about the fishing and the hunting or the gold in the river. People would come and disappear. Together we would warn them, but they would disappear in the woods after dark. Once in the 60s, a group found out about the fishing and tried to build a lodge in the lakeside. They are all gone. We tried to warn them, but they called us insane. It is only recently that this town and forest have gone unnoticed by the outsiders. They have only a few disappearances in the last 10 years. I seen the foundation. I sat up in the chair as I was drawn to his story more and more. Daniel got up and walked over to one of the filing cabinets. He pulled open the top drawer, creating another small dust cloud. He reached inside and pulled out a black binder that was stuffed full of paperwork. Here, he said, motioning for me to take the binder. What is it? I questioned, taking the heavy binder from him. It is all the open missing person cases that I am in charge of. They are all from here. That's crazy, I said as I opened the binder. There must be hundreds of cases in here. Some people say I'm a crappy detective. I know what happened to those people, but I'm not something you can put on an officer's report and still keep your job. If you look at the reports, they all have the same pattern. These people were all last seen before dark in the forest. I ended my conversation with Daniel as he was about to get ready for work. He was working on a missing persons case from 2 towns over. He let me borrow the case binder and the book from his tribe stories. That evening, I set up a small camera and microphone on the opposite side of the fence in Daniel's parents' backyards. In Diane's parents' backyards. If I could get something on tape, I might understand better what I was dealing with. I paired it with my laptop, set it to record, and left the laptop in the bedroom while I was getting ready for dinner. While sitting on the back deck after dinner, I eagerly read through the stories of his ancestors. The only interruption was the sound of a stick being dragged across the fence, and the pop of the fence latch, coupled with Robert's voice repeating, "Right on time," as the sun set behind the mountain. I had forgotten about my camera at this point. That night, I excitedly discussed with Diane what I've discovered during the afternoon. You should interview the neighbors. Most of them are older and are retired, so they'll be home. I think I'll do that tomorrow, I said excitedly. The idea of having discovered a legitimate cryptozoology find that I could present to the community raced through my mind like a blazing wildfire. Only if you take me to a fancy breakfast in the morning, they answered with a devilish smile. Mother and I are going to go pick up blueberries tomorrow evening to make pie. It's her specialty and I think you'll like it. Deal. I went to shut off the lights and realized my camera was still recording through the laptop. Diane, let's see if the camera caught what popped open that gate. Diane slid across the bed as I swiped my fingers across the trackpad and to remove the screensaver. The camera screen popped up, and the camera looked like it was facing up at the window on the house rather than down on the fence row. That's our bedroom window, Diane said quietly. I stood up and I walked over to the window. I could see the power light of the camera looking back at me. Something had moved it. No one had touched it since I set it up, that I could recall. I hopped back on my laptop and rewound the footage. At 8:57 p.m., the camera started to wiggle, and then it violently drops at an awkward angle, and down onto the ground just as the fence started beginning to scrape. We watched and listened as the gate latch unlocked and the gate swung open. Whatever did it, just off the camera. Did you hear that? I asked intensely. What? Diane replied. I bumped the audio level up and I skipped back to the video. In a hissing tone, the words, "No, see, yet," sounded. It was quiet but clear. What was that? Diane asked in a quiet, shocked tone. I fast forward through the footage until I saw the camera start to move. From there, an unseen figure picked up the camera and put it on the post, where it's now facing our bedroom window. Our bedroom light came on, and in the background of the footage you could hear a faint giggle, like a small child would make. John, that's creeping me out. Diane reached across the laptop and shut it. Turn out the lights, we're going to bed. She rolled over in bed and pulled the covers over her body. I shut the lights off and followed. The next day, after taking Diane to breakfast in the next town over, I went door to door asking people what they knew about the forest. Many were hesitant to talk to me until I explained who I was, what I believed, and that I intended to study what was going on. Once that was out of the way, I was warmly welcomed in many of their homes. The townspeople had a wide array of stories. I wrote down as much as I could in a notebook. These stories ranged from relatives disappearing to hearing strange voices at night, to seeing groups of travelers go missing in one night without a trace. Many were older stories of loved ones who wandered into the forest late or failed to make it out before sundown. Everyone seemed to believe in the creatures that populated the pine forest, but no one has ever seen one. One older gentleman mentioned his sister had gone into the forest on an afternoon stroll and never returned. For months afterwards, he swears he could hear her voice calling every evening to him from the woods, but he dared not enter. Eventually, the voice stopped. The rest of the afternoon I dedicated to taking notes on all of the missing persons cases. I only stopped to kiss Diane goodbye as she and her mother left to get blueberries from the forest. She had promised to be home in an hour or two. I was fine with her going since it would be several hours before the sun went down. You feel okay going into the woods after the video feed we saw last night? I questioned. Diane shuddered and then sighed. Nothing bad has ever happened during the day. My mother will be with me. I'm sure it was probably my dad playing a trick on us. Just come home safe. She smiled and closed the door. I returned to my reading. Each case had the same set of circumstances. The person was last seen going into the forest before dark, or just after dark, and not returned once the sun had set. Several of the cases mentioned witnesses hearing strange sounds from the woods. One case in particular mentioned that a country police search group went into the forest after dark. None returned. There was no good explanation to why people went missing. News clippings placed the blame on people getting lost in the Canadian outback, or the possibility of these people running into bears or wolves. Exhausted after all my note-taking, I closed the binder full of cases and sat back in my seat in the living room. I breathed deeply and stood up, collecting the binder and book that Daniel had let me borrow. The front door swung open slowly. I looked up, hoping to see Diane and her mother, but to my surprise, Robert walked in. Hey, I didn't even know you were gone, I said in a tired tone. Yeah. Robert started as he took his shoes off at the door. You were buried so deep in reading that you didn't notice when I left town. Just went out to get some gas for the mower. Your yard is getting kind of loud and needs to be trimmed. Keep an eye out for Diane and Mary. They went to pick blueberries in the woods and hadn't returned yet. Okay, the girls still have time. Sun won't set for another 3.5 hours. I could hear slightly worry in his voice. I finished gathering my things and walked to Diane's house to return the items. Walked to Daniel's house to return the items. When I arrived, he was sitting on the front porch, still in his police uniform with a beer. John, he said with a smile, holding the beer up in salutation. I seen you come to return my binder and book. Did you find what you needed? I handed him the book and binder and took a seat beside him. I found a lot of interesting stuff. I interviewed many of the neighbors, and I believe everyone feels like there is something in the woods. All the missing cases are similar. All the Indian stories are intriguing, but tell me something. Why are these people still living here? I understand your ancestors made a pact, but why not just up and leave? Daniel put his beard down on the porch and sighed deeply. He raised his hands up and placed them behind his head before sinking back into his chair. This will sound stupid, but it has been an oral tradition and agreement of all those raised here that we would stay and make sure nothing would be built on this land beyond what has already existed. We didn't want other folks to suffer what our ancestors had gone through. Everyone here is a relative of a prospector or settler that came here many years ago. Everyone has lost someone to those woods. All those boarded buildings in the town belong to someone here. They've just agreed to never sell them and let them fall into dust. Most people couldn't afford to move away anyway. Some of the houses up the street are the same way. Why give something to someone in this horrid place? We grew up here. We know what it's like to hear the noises in the night and fear for visitors of visiting relatives. If the townspeople all died off and this place falls off the map, it'd be best for everyone. He took another deep breath. We are the last of the people who will live here. Diane's parents were raised here. She wasn't. When they are gone, the house will be abandoned. Will sit abandoned, just like the rest. I sat in silence, trying to wrap my head around what Daniel was telling me. Sure, none of the houses in the town were extravagant, and no particular person seemed to be wealthy, but how could they live in a place that they all seem to fear? What do they look like? I asked. Who? Daniel replied, sitting up a little straighter, as if surprised by my question. The forest walkers, or the fairies, or whatever you want to call them. What do they look like? I have no descriptions in any of the texts you gave me. The only indication of someone talking to them was your ancestors. I sat up and looked at Daniel with a stern look. Tonight's a full moon. Only a few people have been lost in the woods during the dark in the last 10 years. They are angry. You can feel it in the air. I'm going to retire in 2 years. I spent my life trying to find those missing people. I've been in the woods during the day. They are hard to see. They are tall and very skinny. If you look hard, you can see their outline amongst the trees. It's very hard to make out, but there are hundreds of them. They are in the woods now. They won't move until dark, but even now, you can look among them in a tree line and see them standing still. Daniel pointed towards the woods that were across the road from his house. I looked hard, but could see nothing but pines in the fading light. I thanked him for his time and resources and made my way back to Diane's parents' house in the waning light. The sun had set and the cool breeze blew over the road and into the woods as if the forest itself was inhaling. I walked along the broken sidewalk, looking into the dark pines and see if I could catch a glimpse of what Daniel was talking about. The moon was full and extra bright. It almost looked like day out in a slightly bluish tint. There was no noise, no bugs, no birds. Only the breeze and my footsteps filled the night air. I would be home in just another 100 yards or so. John! A blood-curdling cry sounded from just inside the forest line. That voice. I knew that voice. It was Diane. The hair on my neck stood straight up. My heart began to pound with a violent fervor. Diane hadn't come back with her mother when I left. What if she hadn't made it out of the woods? What if she was hurt? What if she'd been taken? John! The scream sounded louder. This time it sounded like she was in agonizing pain. I was in the woods 20 yards deep before I realized what I was doing. My eyes scanned everywhere frantically. Diane! I called out. There was no answer, only dead silence. The moon was so bright I could make out almost everything from the light that shone through the pine branches. Diane! I was breathing through my mouth now, my breath matching the frantic pace of my heart. I stood there in silence, I looked hard in the dense pine forest in front of me. Movement caught my eyes. I wasn't alone. There was movement everywhere, but I couldn't see exactly what it was. Whatever it was made no noise, and it appeared opaque, almost invisible. As if out of nowhere the opaque shapes melded into reality. They were human height. Their skin was white. They had thin legs, arms, and body structure. The skin looked dried but rigid like worms. Their head was large, white sideways cone shapes, with no features, only a small black hole in front. My muscles tensed as pure fear flowed through me. I couldn't move. I was awestruck, and fear consumed at the same point. Dozens of these things were in front of me. They all looked horribly the same. I wanted to run. I couldn't. One of them moved slowly towards me. 20 feet from me. It stopped. It was dead quiet. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. The hole in the front of its head grew larger, as if something was pulsing out of it. Like the peeling of a sausage case in its skin, this thing pulled back, and out of the black appeared to be a young woman's head. My jaws dropped. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. Her hair was black and greasy looking. Her eyes were black ovals. Her skin was pale. She looked up at me. It felt like an eternity as I looked into this human head upon this monstrosity. Her mouth opened. John. Her voice echoed. But I knew that voice. It was Diane's. Confusion took over. The woman's head on the monster twisted sideways in a horrible manner while looking at me with a blank facial expression. John! 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 Diane's voice repeated faster and faster. Then ear-shattering maniacal laughter echoed from the mouth. Tears streaked down my face as my lips began to tremble. It stopped. From the jaw to the forehead, the woman's face split in half, opening from side to side, as if it had been sliced through, revealing a mass of razor-sharp teeth and flailing tentacles like tongues. The creature shrieked. It was so high-pitched and growing that it made the forest shake and my ears ring. I fell backwards onto my back with a hard thud, and for the first moment since I saw the thing, I could move. I began to shuffle frantically backwards, kicking my legs to propel me away from the monstrosity. The creature dropped on all fours and began to rush me in the most inhuman way possible. I knew there was no way of getting up and outrun this thing in time. It was about to be upon me. I raised my arms, covering my face. No! I shouted as I looked away. Nothing. I felt no pain. No creature landed on me. John! Mom! Dad! No! I cried out in a cry rang out in Diane's voice, but only this time it sounded as if it came from the direction of her home. I immediately stood up, trying to comprehend what was happening. The creatures were gone, but something in the underbrush moved violently away from me, tearing up the ground and shaking the branches as it went. Mary! No! Another voice rang out. It was Robert's. I was still confused and scared, but I wasn't going to stay in the woods any longer. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me to Diane's parents' house. Robert was in the backyard, restraining Mary, who was sobbing. Let me go! Let me go! She's gone. They might take you too, Robert replied, hugging his wife to his with all his force. What happened? I demanded. Oh my God, John, Robert said as he turned to me in shock. Diane swore she heard you screaming in the woods and ran after you. We tried to stop her. A scream of pain from Diane rang out in the distance. My fear and adrenaline rush turned to anger. They took the woman I love. These hideous things took Diane. Without thinking, I ran to the garage and scooped up the gas can Robert had filled earlier in that day. I scanned the garage frantically and found a propane torch. A propane torch on the shelf. I quickly made my way to the tree line in the backyard. Robert, hold this, I commanded as I shoved the propane lighter into his arms. I began pouring the gasoline carelessly on the trees and brushed along the forest line. "What are you doing?" he asked with a puzzled look on his face, still trying to comfort his wife. I looked him dead in the eye with a cold stare. "Give me the torch. If they want to take her, I'm taking the forest from them." He reluctantly handed the torch I had given him by force. The forest was dry. The breeze was blowing in the forest. I opened the propane valve, lit the torch, and tossed it into the brush. In seconds, there were towering infernos before me. I grabbed Robert and Mary, who were in shock at what I had just done, and dragged them into the front yard. The fire raged quickly and moved faster than anything I have seen before. Soon the entire town was standing on the road, watching the blaze consuming the pine forest as they had always known. I stood silent among them, with rage in my eyes. Suddenly, inhuman screams of horror and pain filled the air. They were piercing like a knife, causing many people to hold their ears. The townsfolk held their ears tight to block out the sound. Many ran back to their homes in fear or gripped each other for comfort. The screams roared, deafeningly, on and on as the fire raged until suddenly, as quickly as it started, the screams went silent, and only the blaze could be heard. Someone called the fire department, which alerted the forest rangers. There was nothing they could do. The flames spread so fast that the entire forest was burnt to the ground before they could enact a plan. I admitted to starting the fire, and was arrested that night by the county police. I spent 3 days in jail with little or no human contact. The cops moved about the office in a frantic manner, as if they were swamped with more work than they could handle. They ignored me for the better part of my stay. They only feeding me and checking on me before the night. When I awoke in my jail cell the third morning, Daniel was there to greet me. "Good morning," I said groggily. He opened the cell. "You're free to go, John." "What?" I was confused and a little shocked. "Come with me." He motioned to me and followed to follow him. I stood up as he asked, "Did he find Diane? Is she okay? Is she hurt? How?" I'm sorry. The line goes, "They found Diane. Is she hurt? How?" My heart was overjoyed in my confused state. "She had some burns, cuts, bruises, suffered from some smoke inhalation, and she seems to be in shock, but she's alive. Get in the car and I'll take you to the hospital." "I would have told you sooner, but I've been busy with everything that has been going on." "Thank God," I shouted. "But wait, I'm confused. Why am I going free?" "Get in the car. I'll tell you about it on the ride over." The car ride to the hospital was about an hour. On our way over, Daniel explained that I was the least of the problems the county had to deal with now. None of the houses and towns were damaged. The wind blew the fire in the opposite direction. Search and rescue teams combing the forest at night the early morning found Diane in the lakeshore. She was nude and in shock but alive. The biggest issue the county had to deal with was the hundreds of skeletons they found in the forest. They weren't scattered about like victims in a forest fire would be. The burnt-out pine tree trunks contained dozens of skeletons, as if they had been stuffed into the trees. Dan would show me the picture on his phone, and they had taken at one of the scenes. The photo contained a swollen-looking tree trunk that was burnt out. Inside the trunk, you could clearly see a human skeleton contorted in a horrible fashion, with the tree growing around it. What looked like wooden veins of bark fused to the skeleton as if they were growing together. Some of the skeletons have been identified by dental records as people who had gone missing in the woods in the 60s. Others were determined to be hundreds of years old. The coroner was now trying to figure out whom the skeleton remains belonged to and how they could possibly be encased in a tree. "Most of my missing people cases will probably be closed because of this," Daniel said, breathing a heavy sigh of relief. "I've only slept a few hours the past few days because of all the paperwork I had to do on my missing persons cases." Daniel dropped me off at the hospital and I made my way to Diane's room. Her parents were there. She was bruised and cut up but alive, sitting on the bed, looking forward, jaw agape, not blinking at all. When I walked in, she turned to me slowly, not blinking. When our eyes met, she began to sob. I ran to her and embraced her. "They took me," she said through heavy sobs. "They ripped my clothes and tried to put me in there." "Where?" I asked, fighting off tears of my own while continuing to hug her tightly. "In the trees. In the trees," she said through sobs. "They feed the forest with us. The forest was dying and it hungered." Not another word was said. I just held her tight till her sobbing stopped. When Diane was released from the hospital, we left for home. Her parents boarded up the house and bought a condo close to where we work. It's been years since this happened. We don't talk about it. Her parents don't talk about it. Yet I'm still obsessed with whatever these things were. With the forest gone, a development company brought all the land that the town sat on, cheap, and turned it into a housing development. No one had since disappeared to my knowledge in that area. There are some reports of that the place is haunted and that at night you can still hear strange screams and voices. My camera had been recording the night of the fire. I watched the video once before I deleted it. Right before Diane was taken, the latch on the gate was popped by something opaque my camera couldn't make out. The camera then suddenly turned to the forest. My voice could be heard calling Diane's voice, and Diane's name in a scared tone. Diane was seen running into the forest, calling for me. As she disappeared beyond what the camera could see, there is a voice giggling like a small child that states, "We take," in a raspy high voice. The brush all around moves violently towards where Diane was last seen before you can hear her screams. I still run my cryptozoology group at the university and have never come across another story with such creatures. As obsessed as I am trying to figure out what they were, if I ever come across another place that talked about fairies in the woods who take people, I think I'll pass up investigating these stories. And that is the end of this story. Seems Tinkerbell got quite violent after Pan left. Now let's see how you are all enjoying this evening so far. Welcome to the stream, Miss Colt. And thank you for the follow. Islam Right About Women. Interesting name. Now, before we move on to another short story, I'd like to remind you all that if you have any scary and creepy, fabulous quips you would like to share with us, be sure to join the Discord channel, share it in our creepy channel, and your quip might be read next week. Now, let's see what short appetizer of a story we have to drench the horribly fabulous story we have just read. This one is called "They Got the Definition Wrong" by Lou. It has been said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. I understand the sentiment behind the saying, but it's wrong. I entered the building on a bet. I was strapped for cash and didn't buy into the old legends of the hotel to begin with, so $50 was more than enough to get me to do it. It was simple. Just reach the top floor, the 45th floor, shine my flashlight from the window. The hotel was old and broken, including the elevator, so that meant hiking up the stairs. So up the stairs I went. As I reached each platform, I noted an old brass plaques displaying the floor numbers: 15, 16, 17, 18. I felt a little tired as I crept higher, but so far, no ghosts, no cannibals, no demons. Piece of cake. I can't tell how happy I was to have entered the last stretch of numbers. I hopefully counted them aloud at each platform: 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 44. I stopped and looked back down the stairs. I must have miscounted, so I continued up. 44. One more flight. 44. And then down 10 flights. 44. 15 flights. 44. And so it begins for as long as I can remember. So, really, insanity isn't doing something repeatedly and expecting different results. It's knowing that the results will never ever change, that each door leads to the same staircase, to the same number. It's realizing you no longer fall asleep, and not knowing whether you'll be running for days, or weeks, or years. It's when the sobbing slowly turns into laughter. Actually, both definitions of the word insanity in this case is wrong. Insanity is actually the inability to tell the difference between right and wrong on a legal standpoint. These are used in court cases to determine if a person is legally insane. No joke, no pun, just the rare bit of wisdom I like to sprinkle upon the Philistines who use this word incorrectly. It's been a pet peeve of mine. But we're not here for wisdom. We're here for the fabulous and the creepy, aren't we? Welcome to the stream, Star King and Cronecker. I hope you're enjoying the stories thus far. We're down 3, moving on to the next long story, so be sure to get a drink, get a snack, because this one may take a while. Let's see here. Our next story. Our next story is called The Melancholy of Herbert Solomon, written by Michael Whitehouse. This one is also found on Creepypasta, a site great for creepy stories, but terrible when it comes to their ads. Ooh. My hand's getting quite tired holding this book. I need a book stand. Perhaps I could get the Choppyreviewer to make a donation go for that. Anyway, here's our story. On several occasions, my interest in the supernatural has taken me to some of the most prestigious seats of the learning in the entire United Kingdom. From the venerable halls of Oxford and Cambridge, to the more humble surroundings of the inner city colleges and schools, my pursuit of evidence to substantiate such claims has rarely been fruitful. However, while exploring the University of St. Andrews in Scotland, I found a rather interesting tomb hidden away in the dark and musty corner of the campus library. The book itself was unusual. It's covered, bound, and weathered, and the blackened leather which unashamedly wore the wrinkles of cracks and time. It dated back to the 16th century. It seemed to contain various descriptions and accounts of the daily lives of the people of Etrex, a small isolated town built on such moorlands of the country. Pursuing the volume, there was a variety of entries from the numbers of authors spanning a 60-year period. It seemed to have been handed down from town elder to town elder over that time. And to be quite frank, most of it contained idle musings from the townsfolk and plans of a number of humble building projects and improvements. Just as I was about to conclude that the book was of little interest to me, I noticed inside of the back cover that something was just drawn, a picture. It was elegant, depicted, but I would never have described it as a pleasing sight. In fact, my immediate reaction was one of disgust upon first viewing it. The combination of harsh, almost angry black lines used as the stark imagery of the scene, as relayed by the artist, left me with a thoroughly unpleasant impression of its subject. I shuddered as I cast my eyes over it in an attempt to take in the pictures of what seemed to be a man, tall with long, thin arms and legs. His face was partially obscured by one of his gaunt white hands, but what could be seen was a monstrous face. Prominent veins protruded from his forehead, leading up to a pallid bald head. His eyes were deep set into a skull, and surrounded woods seemed to twist and lean away from him fearfully. At first, I assumed the picture was some from hideous graffiti, but at the bottom of the page was inscribed the date of 1578 and a rather unusual name, Herbert Solomon. Whether this was the name of the menacing figure in the drawing or the artist, I did not know. Disturbed yet compelled by the dark woodland scene, I decided that the book required further study. I desired greatly to know who this creature was, and why someone had felt the need to capture this strange form in a drawing on the back of a book otherwise used to record the lives of the townfolk. On closer inspection what surprised me further was the same image seemed to recur elsewhere in the book, but drawn by apparently different individuals. Within the book I found numerous mentions of Herbert Solomon, and it became quite clear that he was indeed the emaciated man in the picture. He had lived in the 16th century in the outskirts of Utrecht town. It was a small and underdeveloped place, surrounded on all sides by a thick cover of Utrecht forest, which itself sat in the midst of a vast region in southern moorland. The town had a small parish church with one humble steeple, an inn normally used by those traveling to the unforgiving countryside, and quaint cobblestone streets which wound their way around the stone cottages in the town hall. According to the descriptions in the book, during the December of 1577, children began to disappear from the town. The first was a young girl by the name of Elena Sutherland. She had been playing with some friends by the old well in the outskirts of town, but had dropped a small toy doll in it by accident, which had caused her much distress. Unable to retrieve it, she returned home to borrow some of the string of an old hook, in the hopes of being able to fish the doll out of the water below. She was last seen walking towards the well, just as the sun set. In a panic, the townsfolk searched. They dredged the well, they combed the wheat fields, and even sent several groups of those willing into the surrounding woods. Alas, the girl was not found. A few days later, a young boy by the name of Eric Kennedy was running an errand for his grandmother. It was dark, but he had only to take some wool over to the Monroe place as way of thanks for the grain they had provided, and they lived by only a few streets away. It was assumed that at least the center of the town would be safe, but the boy never completed his errand. He vanished, as if he was torn from existence. By the end of January, an unusually bitter winter had caused sufficient damage to the town and its people. Large, thick sheets of ice and snow covered each house and building. Several people died from the cold alone, and the general mood of Utrecht town was a somber one. Despite these trying times, the town people were more concerned with the safety of their offspring. In total, 7 children had now disappeared without rhyme or reason. Whole families wept in despair, and the people of Utrecht began to view one another suspiciously. They knew the truth. Someone was taking their children from them. By mid-February, 2 more had went missing, and accusatory glances were now being shared between every family and every member of the community. The town elder decided to act, and took it upon himself the arduous task of identifying and catching the fiend. Bureaucratic decisions were had, church groups convened, and in every house, in every street, in every corner of Utrecht, one name crossed the lips of the inhabitants: Herbert Solomon. The more the name was mentioned, the more certain his guilt became. Herbert Solomon was an outsider. He lived in a small wooden cabin amongst the woods which surrounded the town, and due to his unfortunate appearance, tended to avoid human contact. What his malady was, no one was sure, and in the unenlightened times of the 16th century Scotland, many believed he was cursed. Modern eyes would have guessed him to be the victim of a wasting disease. He rarely ventured into town, except on a few occasions to trade for supplies, and even in those instances, he covered his face with a brown tarnished hat and gray piece of cloth, which obscured his features below two deep sets of darkened eyes. Several of the townsfolk told stories of Herbert Solomon. According to these accounts, he would stand in the edge of the forest, watching the farmers till their land, and their children play in the fields. It was his fascination with children which left many feeling uneasy. So, some of the town's children returned home from playing near the woods, on a number of occasions with beautiful crafted dolls and toys. They were a present from Herbert Solomon, and being innocent children, they could not know of the dangers therein. When the children began to disappear, eyes immediately turned to the strange man living in the woods. Accusations were carried by the whispers of the fearful parents, and as the whispers increased in number, so did their volume, until it was decided that Herbert Solomon must be stopped. On a cold February night, the elders of the town decreed that Solomon should be arrested immediately. Grief, anger, resentment, and fear grew to a fever pitch with the news of every man, woman, and child set out across the fields, entering into the surrounding forest in search of the child killer Herbert Solomon. Details of exactly what occurred that night are limited, but it seemed as though the people of Ettrick Town attempted to remove Herbert from his small cabin by setting it on fire. The crowd cheered as the heat grew and the forest rose. His screams echoed throughout the woods, finally to be silenced by the flames. The townspeople believed that justice had been done, and while the grief of the parents who had lost their children could never be quenched, there was at least the satisfaction of knowing that the man responsible was now dead. However, over the following few days, an unease descended upon the entire town. Stories began to spread of strange encounters in the streets at night. A gaunt, shadowy figure prowling the cobbled streets, hiding in the darkness. Within a week, numerous residents claimed to have woken up during the night to the petrifying sight of the unwelcome visitor. One account was an elderly lady who woke to the sound of something rustling under her bed, only to nearly die of shock as a tall, thin man pulled himself out from underneath. She fainted, but not before she saw his face, a withered complexion, as if ravaged by disease, his eyes blacker than night, and his hands comprised of tightly pulled skin over a bony interior. Another story consisted of a local tradesman who, while investigating the noise from his cellar, was confronted by a hideous figure, so tall and gaunt it had to hunch over to avoid the low ceiling entirely. Its sheet white face flickered in the candlelight. The man managed to escape, but he refused to re-enter his premises. It became clear to the townspeople that the vengeful ghost of Herbert Solomon was still searching for other victims from beyond the grave. His hate and hideous form haunted the town which murdered him. With each passing day, the silence grew in intensity and number. The fog descended on the town, and the people wept and grieved at the sound of Herbert Solomon terrorizing each person, night by night. He was seen wandering amongst the wheat fields, in the cellars and lofts of the college houses, his long gaping footsteps ringing out each night through the streets of Ettrick Town. He had been cursed. In life, Herbert Solomon had taken and murdered their children, and now in death, he seemed to possess the twisted means to terrorize the entire town. Then the unthinkable happened. Another child went missing. A young orphan girl, who had often wandered the streets when she could find no place to call home for the night. She was heard screaming for her life. The townsfolk rushed to their windows, looking out but not daring to leave the imaginary safety of their homes, paralyzed by fear. The screaming ceased quickly, and moments later, wandering aimlessly out of the fog, came the menacing figure of Herbert Solomon. He rushed down the street, his lifeless limbs and his lifeless arms bashing against the house which he passed, scraping the doors and windows with rigid fingers, emanating an unnatural yell of anger and hatred out his way. The girl was gone, and the town grieved once more. In the preceding days, the fog grew denser, and with it came an unwelcome news of two more children taken. One a girl, whom at having a raging argument with her family, left the house never to be seen again. The other a boy named Matthew, the son of a notable drunk, who had taken from him his bed by the hands of Solomon, while the father laid unconscious from drink. During a church service, the unthinkable happened. Solomon appeared briefly in the aisles of the church, seemingly unaffected by the consecrated ground. The congregation whimpered in horror and disdain as his warped, spinally form walked slowly behind the pillar and then vanished. It was indeed a show of influence. Hope was almost lost. Not even a place of worship could deny him, and he was now capable of entering any home at night and then taking whatever, or whoever he wished. The town had to act, or abandon the place altogether, but there was no guarantee that the curse of Solomon would not follow. The local vicar, a man of the name Mackenzie, was asked by the people of Ettrick to use his sacred power, which was ordained to him. In an attempt to destroy or banish the spirit of Solomon, a plan was provided. The vicar was a few chosen individuals armed with torches, swords which had been blessed, and vials of holy water, would take guard over the town, waiting for the cursed figure of the child killer to show his face once more. Then they would confront him. Observing as much as the town as possible for several house windows, roofs, and strategic street corners, Mackenzie's chosen waited. They did not, however, need to wait long. That night, the lonely figure of Herbert Solomon appeared through the mist, walking the streets of Ettrick with purpose. Yells and screams rang out as people alerted one another that Solomon had returned. Families held their children close as the dark dots consumed the town. Please spare my child. Take another. Mackenzie was the first to confront him. His will was shaken by the sight of Solomon's hideous pallid face, rotten and ravaged. The gangly, spindly figure stood staring intently at the vicar through black, clouded eyes. Another man now joined, then another. Before long, Herbert Solomon was surrounded. Mackenzie instructed the men to slowly close the circle, drawing their swords with one hand and brandishing flaming torches with the other. Fear gripped them, but they knew that this could be their only chance. Mackenzie threw a vial at Solomon's lumbering feet, and he uttered a Christian psalm. Another man struck him with a torch. The blow crackled as the cloth-covered arm of Solomon caught fire. Cheers rang out from the townsfolk watching from their homes above. But the man had stayed too close, providing a gap in the circle which Solomon claimed with purpose. He fled. His spindly legs and flailing arms cast spider-like shadows in the walls and cobblestone streets as he passed. The townfolk gave chase, following the pathetic figure as he negotiated each street corner, lane, and courtyard in an attempt to escape their rage. The noise alerted the town. Herbert Solomon was trying to flee. From every home across the town, people poured out of their houses, carrying whatever they could as a makeshift weapon. They flooded the streets and ran towards the screams, the shouts of Solomon's pursuers. With every turn of the cobble street corner, Solomon was running out of places to hide. Finally, he stumbled down the town's main street. He stopped. The townsfolk had blocked all escape routes. He was trapped. Mackenzie pushed his way to the front of the crowd, asking for quiet and calm as he approached the hunched, defeated figure of Herbert Solomon. He and his chosen few were going to rid the town of Ettrick of this abomination once and for all. Vial in hand, accompanied by several large, bullish men brandishing swords, Mackenzie approached slowly, reciting verses from the Bible. Through dark eyes, Herbert Solomon observed the townsfolk, their faces etched with hate and thoughts of revenge. Moving towards him, and then he simply turned and entered an open doorway next to him. The people gasped, and Mackenzie and his followers rushed inside after him. The house they had entered was still, and laying on the hardwood floor in the main hallway was a pale body of a young girl. The creaking of the floorboards under the weight sounded above the numerous pursuers searched the house, disappointed to find nothing. Then something miraculous occurred. The little girl gasped for air. She was alive. She had little to or no strength, or she could do was utter one word. Below. In the cellar of the house, Mackenzie found a grim and horrific scene. The floor was covered in blood, and the quiet dead body of a man laid face down upon it, chained to the walls of that dim place where the children who had been taken. They were partially drugged, malnourished, and traumatized, but they were alive. The town rejoiced with the news. Families were reunited, lives were mended. The mist of the bleak and horrible winter slowly lifted, and all seemed well. All regaining their strength, the children recounted what had befallen them. Each of them had been taken by a man called Tom Sutherland. He was the father of the first girl who had went missing, and it appeared that it was he who had killed her. No one knew for sure, but many were aware of his bad temper, and on more than one occasion he had beaten poor Elena. Consumed by guilt and loss, Sutherland began to take children at knife point and lock them in a cellar, often drugging them with a local herb and occasionally beating them, while pathetically weeping in self-pity. On the day that the children were found, Sutherland entered the cellar drunk, carrying a knife and a rope. He began striking the children once more, and told them that one of them would die that day. He untied one of the children and pinned her to the ground with his knees. The knife hovered over their neck, but just as he was about to plunge the blade into her, someone entered the house. Sutherland grew ferocious of anger, but whoever was standing on top of the staircase struck with such fear into him that he quickly backpedaled into the cellar. Ducking under one doorway was a tall, scarred figure of Herbert Solomon. At the sight of him, and now being freed, the little girl crawled quickly between Herbert's long legs. She was free, but too weak to run. She fainted just before she could escape the house. Details of what happened to Tom Sutherland was muddled by the unstable to semi-conscious conditions of the witnesses, but it was clear that his neck was broken. His head twisted with such force that it faced an unnatural opposite direction. There were various accounts of subsequent glimpses of Herbert Solomon, and some of the children claimed to find beautifully crafted dolls and toys on occasion set on the edge of the woods. But of course, this cannot be substantiated. Indeed, I would have said the entire story could not be sustained if it were not for the events which I experienced several months after reading the old book. In the depths of St. Andrews University, a colleague and dear friend of mine invited me to stay with his family for a few days in the countryside. I knew that the house was in the borders, not half an hour drive from Eltrick, and could not miss a chance to have a closer look at their area. I had managed to persuade the powers to be to allow me to take the book from the St. Andrews and show it to my friend. He had a particular interest and not insufficient knowledge of the history of the area. I thought perhaps he could shine a light on this curious tale. His family were very kind to me, and the house and its grounds were serene in the summer sun, and his children playing in the fields having a carefree and happy time. After reading the book, he told me that it was fascinating, and that he knew of a local poem which had been written down in the 17th century about a man called Solomon who killed children, but he could not tell me any more about it. The next day, he heard screams coming from a nearby house. It was my friend's little girl. We raced outside, following the cries for help over the old fence and down the steep grassy hill. We reached the winding and furious river. The girl had fallen in and was clinging to a large tree root which thrusted from the opposite embankment of the water. The root was wet, and my friend let out a scream of anguish as his daughter lost grip, began to be swept down the stream towards the large foundations of a huge sharp rocks which jutted out beneath the surface. The river would not let go and was throwing her around with such force that it was difficult to see how she could survive. Filled with abject terror that she could drown we finally made our way to the water's edge. As we rushed into the murky current, we reached helplessly as the poor little girl was about to crash into the rocks. We were too far away. Suddenly, our attention was grabbed by the creaks and cracks of a tall, gaunt figure on the other side of the river, rushing out of the woods at tremendous speed on the opposite side of the bank. With one swift motion, a thin, bony hand plunged into the violent water, prevailing against the immense currents, finally pulling the young girl to safety. She was alive, frightened, crying, but alive and unhurt. The pale-faced, emaciated figure placed the girl gently on the ground, stared at us from across the river through the darkened eyes as we observed clambered to safety, then turned and disappeared into the woods, fading away to nothing but a memory. Even in death, Herbert Solomon was the kindest and gentlest of souls. And that is how that story concludes. And I hope you have all had a wonderful and fabulous evening tonight. And I hope you have the most fantastic of nightmares. But this is the end of today's tale, and we will have another episode next week, and I hope you all enjoy. Now let's see what we have missed in chat. It seems you have all been quite busy. Amberger says, hearts for everyone. Well, she is so sweet. Don't get too spooked. Have a cozy blanket. Thank you, I brought my teddy too. Well, if the teddy may help calm your fears, Konecker, but the nightmares are sure to come. And 45 Caliber 08 says, love message for one reading this. Good blessed your family and have a good health. I wish that your dreams will be granted. Thank you, 45 Caliber. Just spreading the good vibes, and we all appreciate it. And Amberger says, I'll take some time for him to read it. He's on a roll right now. I'm sure he'll appreciate it. Yes, it has been a while, but I do appreciate the message, and I hope you all have a fabulous night tonight. Till then, I'll see you next week. Choppyreviewer is coming again tomorrow to play Space Marine game, so be sure to tune in for that. Till then, pleasant dreams.